Right. Instead of abortion, which isn't murder, they wait until their kids are fully grown up, fully out the womb, and then they murder their entire families. So much better, right? Next time you find yourself asking, what about the men, or men experience this too as a grown ass woman, I want you to really ask yourself, do men ever have these thoughts? Do they ever think, how could we be helping the women right now? How could we make their lives easier even if they're not someone we want to sleep with or someone that we're related to? Is the way we can't have a single conversation about women's rights and what women go through without some woman, also the men, but some woman being like, what about men? What about men? You think about them more than they think about you, and that's embarrassing. Stand up.
I don't know what to say about it because I don't know why you would want to talk to a man as a woman unless you absolutely have to. If he's not the cashier, he's not the guy at the bank, he's not your professor, he's not your boss, he's not one of your employees, or he's not like a male relative that you have trained really well, I don't understand why you would want that. So I don't know what to say. I don't know why you would like use them for extracurricular activities. Like, I don't understand that. If that's what you want to do with your life, go for it. But considering the male loneliness epidemic, I'm going to wager that they're not good friends. So I don't, like, if they're really shitty partners, I'm going to assume they're also really shitty friends too. And also, a lot of the time, they are only friends with women that they would potentially sleep with. And that's weird to me. That's weird. Because they usually don't treat women that they wouldn't sleep with that well. So I don't know. It's weird stuff. I don't know how you get to a point where you feel safe enough for all that, but kudos to you, I guess, or good luck. I don't know, but that's not something I would ever encourage. Where I stand in general with women in terms of any type of relationship with men is like avoided at all costs, but I know that that's not something that all women can do, but I'm a big fan of like 4B, 5B, 6B, all of it. Just so you know, feminists were fighting so that you could have rights without getting married to a man. They did not fight so that you could get on your hands and knees and ask your oppressor to marry you. If that's what you want to do, have fun. Very embarrassing, no matter the context, but has nothing to do with feminism. You guys say everything is feminism when it has nothing to do with that. If they weren't doing hunger strikes and protesting about it and making that like the pinnacle of their activism, it has nothing to do with feminism. Nothing. Because feminism is not about women being able to make a choice without getting murdered. Like, I think that's really how a lot of you guys view it. Like, anything that a woman does can be feminist to you. Like, as long as a woman is making a choice, like, if I go say I want to go, like, punch myself in the face in the mirror, you guys will be like, okay, the more you do it, the more feminism we have. Because you guys don't understand that it's about female liberation. It's not about women being able to make choices. The choices thing is only about making choices in regards to like reproductive rights, the my body my choice. That is the only thing that has anything to do with choices. The rest of the choices and the choices that you guys choose to defend and say are in the name of feminism are things that the patriarchy coincidentally already wanted from you, but you're like, but I'm choosing to do it. Like, I'm choosing to be the patriarchy's princess. So it's different. It's not. It has nothing to do with female liberation. It has nothing to do with the liberation of the female sex class. And if it has nothing to do with that, if it doesn't collectively contribute to the liberation of female people, then it is not, it has nothing to do with feminism. Feminists are not fighting for it. I know it's really hard for you guys to get that through your thick ass skulls, but that's the reality. It's not about what makes your selfish ass feel good. It's not about you humiliating yourself for a man in the name of equality. It has nothing to do with that. It has something to do with like switching gender roles and stuff. That's fine. But that's not what feminists were fighting for. I'll see like a cute video of a kid or a cute picture that someone has posted of their child online. I'm like, oh, that's really cute. And that's the normal reaction to have. But then I think about the fact that they're giving predators content to make deep fakes of that innocent, beautiful child. There was a man that was 27 years old that was being paid to make deep fakes of people's kids. And these requests were coming from fathers and family friends and uncles and stuff like that. And so if family members are doing stuff like this, what do you think that predators, people that don't have any sort of relationship with your children, are going to be doing with those pictures? It genuinely makes my stomach turn when I think about it, because
No, you shouldn't have to worry about predators doing that type of stuff to your kids' photos. You shouldn't have to worry about them making like very realistic, especially with the existence of AI, like making realistic videos using their innocent face so that they can get off to it. You should not have to worry about that, but you do. You do. You can't control who sees your kid in public and what they do and whatever, but you can control giving them, basically feeding them content and giving them a kid to obsess over online. You can avoid giving details about your kid's childhood online. You can avoid exploiting them online. You can avoid all of that. And I'm not just talking about people with big platforms. I'm talking about people that have any sort of following, any sort of public account, because you never know who's going to come across it. You never know. All it takes is one person, and the next thing you know, your innocent baby is on the dark web and someone is commissioning some weirdo to make videos of them. And it's sickening and no one wants to think about it. But I hope that the new trend of 2025 is bashing people that post their kids on TikTok, on Instagram, and all those things, because it's not okay. It's not okay. We don't need to see how cute your kid is so badly that you are feeding predators content. Like when I think about the Four Seasons baby, that baby was wearing a diaper. There are thousands and thousands, probably millions of grown adults that have pictures of your child in a diaper. Like it doesn't register that that's weird because we're like, oh, it's just a cute baby. Who's going to think of that in a sexual way? But there are millions of people that are thinking about it in that way. And that should make your stomach turn as a parent. Seeing that many saves on a video of your child, knowing that people are downloading these things and doing God knows what with them, that should make your stomach turn. Your videos and stuff of your kids blowing up, that should make your stomach turn. And if it doesn't, then I really question you as a parent and you should feel ashamed of yourself. Why is it that people's reaction to Chappell Roan having boundaries and standing on them and people crossing those boundaries and having to be told like, hey, I'm still a person, I'm not public property just because you like my music. How come the response to that is, oh, you don't belong in this industry instead of this industry needs to change? And I feel like it also speaks to female socialization because people expect for women to make themselves uncomfortable, to make other people uncomfortable, but that's just not how shit works. Women should be able to say, hey, this makes me uncomfortable, don't fucking do that. If you're disrespectful, you should expect that a woman is going to be disrespectful back because we are human, we are not your public property, we are not here to take up as little space as possible, we are not here to make other people feel good while they make us feel bad. That's not what we're here to do. And I just love that she's not willing to sacrifice her autonomy and integrity and what feels good for her just so that she can be like the pop princess or feed into what people think that a pop star or a female artist should be. She should not have to make herself uncomfortable or be put into situations that don't sit right with her as a human being just so that people can think she belongs in the industry. And I feel like we need more women to be like Chappell Roan. We need more women to say, fuck you, you're not going to disrespect me, you're not going to talk to me however the fuck you want. You're here to do your job, I'm here to do mine, and you're going to be respectful and you're going to respect my boundaries or you're going to get cussed the fuck out. Yeah. We are not here to just sit there and look pretty and nod and smile and act like everything is great. We're not here to be fucking agreeable. We are entire full human beings and it should not be a requirement in the entertainment industry to be as small and quiet and agreeable as possible. If you enjoy their talent, also enjoy the fact that they are human beings that have autonomy and boundaries and they need to be implemented. If you guys can cheer on men when they beat up paparazzi and they cuss them out and all those things, you should be able to handle a woman confronting paparazzi for being disrespectful. She didn't beat his ass. She did not go full on like Johnny Depp assaulting them or anything like that. She communicated her boundaries. She communicated and was like, hey, what you did wasn't cool. That's it. But you guys can't handle that because you think women are just there to agree with everything. And so many of you as women are so used to doing that yourselves that seeing another woman do that is probably triggering to you because you're like, wait, you're stepping out of line. No, we need to change this shit and quickly. Well, y'all are not gonna like this, but the reason that you hate yourself is because you also hate other women. Like, you just can't convince me that you can have like a lot of internalized misogyny as a woman and also love yourself. Those things do not coincide. As long as you are seeing other women as your competition, thinking every woman is against you, thinking that you have to compare yourself to other women in a negative way, like, oh, I'm not like other girls, or I'm better than her, or whatever, like, as long as you view other women like that instead of like beautiful people that exist and coexist with you and have things to offer, such as beautiful connection and all these other things, then no, you're not going to love yourself completely. So many of you see men above women and then wonder why you also hate yourself, but like the answer is right there. As long as you don't unlearn that, what has been conditioned within you for you to have to compare yourself, or you think that you have to be better than other girls or not like other girls in order to have value, you're going to hate yourself a bit. I fully believe that like the most valuable connection that a woman can have, regardless of sexuality, is a connection, a genuine connection with other women. And that's not to say that all women are angels and that you're going to have a good, positive relationship with every single one that you come across. Obviously, that's not true because women are just humans at the end of the day. But just inherently, a relationship where one is not the other's oppressor, where you guys both want to see each other grow and you're rooting for each other and you're really, really wanting the best for each other, I just think that's infinitely going to be better in the long run. It's going to save you a lot more than those romantic relationships that you place more value on. But as long as you see the world through the lens of like, oh, it's me and my man against the world, and I need my man, and like my man, blah, 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 yeah, you're gonna hate yourself a bit because you don't see the value in female connection and female friendship and the beauty of other women. And of course, you're not going to be able to see it in yourself if you can't also see it in other women. As long as you try to distance yourself from other women and be, I'm not like her, I'm not like the other girls, I'm better than her, like, your only competition should be you and your fucking self. You and yourself. As long as you are seeing other women or like trying to distance yourself and be like, oh, I'm not like them, then you're going to hate yourself a little bit. That's just how it goes. I really don't have quite as hard of a time at loving myself. And obviously, there's no one thing that's going to make that easy because there's socialization and societal expectations and all these other things that go into it. But I will say that when you unlearn, internalize misogyny a lot, then you are going to be a lot better off. You're going to feel this like lightness to you that you just cannot have when you think less of women collectively. I haven't really seen anyone talking about this, and when you search up Kanye West's name, you don't see like allegations next to it. You don't see anything about it. So I want to make sure that there's enough attention brought to it. Basically, there's a lawsuit that was filed by his former assistant. That was his assistant from 2021 to 2022. And her name is Lauren Pisciata. I hope I'm saying that correctly. But essentially, she is accusing him of drugging and sexually assaulting her at a studio session. And this happened to be hosted by Kanye and Diddy. At this time, she's not saying that Diddy did anything, but he was there. At this studio session, she claims that he laced the drink, and also it was a requirement for everyone to drink if they wanted to stay there. And after her drink was laced, he committed sexual battery against her. She also claims that she was subjected to explicit texts as well as inappropriate photos, videos, and phone calls before she was fired by him. She has also stated that he once forced himself into her room at 6 a.m. and dropped his towel before thrusting his naked body into her face and ignoring her when she asked him to stop. This should come as no surprise to anyone that has been paying attention for the last 10 years or so. But because people ignore misogyny and because people give so many passes to men that are very disgusting and they usually aren't that great at hiding it either, it's going to be surprising to some people and it's going to be unbelievable to some people. But if you have been paying attention, it's not a reach to say that someone that openly degrades women, someone that talks about women owing him sex in any capacity, would then be someone that would harm women physically. Anyone that believes a woman owes them sex for anything, whether it's taking them to dinner or thinking that they gave them their career or anything like that, it's not a reach that they would end up hurting women or sexually abusing them or anything like that because they feel entitled to women's bodies. And you could say it's just a song, but apparently it's not. And the fact that that even comes to your mind at all is very indicative of your entire mindset and how you view women and how you view consent. And obviously that is not something that's important to you because you feel entitled. I think we really do need to start paying attention to these signs, because a lot of these men, they are not good at hiding the fact that they're terrible, misogynistic, abusive people, but people want to give men so many different passes until their behavior escalates, and then they want to act shocked and be like, oh my God, I know he said that in a song, I know he said this and this and that, but I can't believe he did that. I don't believe he did that. And that makes no fucking sense, and it's unacceptable. And we keep failing so many women because we refuse to see these patterns of behaviors, and we refuse to hold these men accountable when they're being openly misogynistic. Not only misogynistic, but also predatory. These things are not okay, and they need to be put in the spotlight. I don't care how much you like his music. I don't care how much you like anything about him. You think he's so funny and so edgy. I don't give a fuck. This man is disgusting and predatory, and I'm sure that this is only a little bit of what he has done, and hopefully more people will feel more comfortable to come forward and say something now that his assistant has. But yes, I stand with her and other survivors and anyone else that has a story. And of course, people are going to be like, it's just allegations, like you don't really know, and whatever. But I'm going to support this woman and hope that she gets the justice that she deserves if this did happen. And I have no reason to believe that it didn't. And I think producer Metro Boomin has been accused of rape by a woman, and he also had the audacity to make a song about it. Essentially, she is saying that he raped her after she ingested alcohol and half of a Xanax bar. And in his song, I'll put the lyrics on the screen, but the song is called Rap Saved Me, and it kind of corroborates her story of the Xanax bar and the alcohol and her getting pregnant by him as a result of the rape and having to get an abortion. As always, my love and support goes out to her, and I really hope that he is held accountable for this. The entire Playboy empire was built on the abuse of women, so I really wish that you guys would retire the Playboy bunny costumes, the Hugh Hefner costumes, because quite frankly, it's fucking disgusting. If you haven't seen it, there's a documentary called Secrets of Playboy, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you watch it so you can get the full information, but I'll give you some cliff notes essentially. So essentially, the Playboy Mansion was ran like a brothel, and him and his friends, whatever you want to call them, his fellow rapists, they drugged and raped so many young women. Essentially ran it like a cult. He controlled their finances, their social lives. He gave them curfews. Like, he controlled them completely. He also had hidden cameras and microphones in all of the rooms, and he essentially was using it to collect revenge porn, and all of the women were afraid to leave because they figured that he would use that against them. Also forced a woman to engage in bestiality and so many other horrific things. You can look more into it. I'm not sure what I'm allowed to talk about on TikTok, but it's really horrific stuff. And I think we need to stop associating ourselves and aligning ourselves with something that is so deeply misogynistic and was abusive to so many women. And Holly Madison is one woman that has had a lot to say. I highly recommend that you read what she has said about it. It's very dark and very heavy, so obviously trigger warning for that. But it's heavy stuff, and it's really fucking disgusting. And at some point in society, we have to stop supporting systems like that. Yes, he is dead. Yes, whatever. But when you continue to dress up as that, and you continue to make it seem like it was just something just so sexy and glamorous and all that stuff, like, it's not that. It's not that. Like, so many young women were hurt so that people could look at magazines, and so many of those women did not consent to being in them, such as Marilyn Monroe. She didn't consent to being on the cover of one of those magazines, and he still profited from it, and even in death didn't respect her and decided that he wanted to be buried next to her, despite the fact that that's the last thing that she would have wanted. Women cannot even be protected and safe in death from men, and it's like there's always just violation after violation. He was a terrible fucking person, and he tried to do certain things to make it seem like he wasn't, but he abused so many women, and so many men helped him do that. And I just think that we need to stop. We need to do away with all of the Playboy shit. It's fucking disgusting. It's an empire entirely built on the abuse of women, and very young women at that. So let's pack it up.
Never underestimate a man's ability to center himself in any situation or his commitment to being the main character, not only in his own life, but in everybody else's. This is why decentering men has nothing to do with like hating or trying to displace them. The practical application of it actually just looks like becoming the main character in your own life and matching their energy otherwise. Now, the unfortunate part is that society really supports men on this main character, center yourself type journey. That's because the patriarchy needs that in order to function. And capitalism needs a hierarchy in order to function. And capitalism needs to be able to extract value out of people. And it does that by giving them a narrative and using them as a tool for its own purposes. So men and women have been given a very different narrative by capitalism and by the patriarchy and the systems that support those things like religion and the government. This is the reason why Harrison Butker felt so comfortable and so justified speaking to a college graduating class of probably more women than men. According to the recent trends of like who's really getting college degrees, it's mostly women. So he's speaking to mostly women in the audience and saying stuff like, it's really cool that y'all got your degrees and stuff, but your life is really going to start like it did for my wife when she started her vocation of motherhood. Up until then, she was like a successful college basketball player, like graduated also with a degree, but until she decentered herself and became a wife and a mother. I do believe people's lives change when they become a mother, but they don't start. Your life starts when you're born. Like, that's a simple scientific fact. Like, it's kind of crazy to say shit like that. Like, when did your life start, Butker? He didn't say any of that kind of stuff to the men, only to the women. Only the women had this call of, it's cool that you like really went out here and tried to do something for yourself, but you need to decenter yourself immediately. Like, how dare you be the main character in your own life? And that's because he can't fathom that he and other men would ever not be a priority. Like, he probably really thinks his mom's life didn't start until he came out of her, because that's when his life started. Like, I'm telling you, that's really how deep the main character syndrome goes. And the reason oftentimes it's like older women that come on here and warn the younger women about marriage and, you know, really the dangers of like living with a man and tying your life to a man, and they just tell you that you're better off not doing it, is exactly because they underestimated how deep that main character syndrome really runs and how heartless it can really make someone when they truly believe that all the things and the people around them exist as a supporting cast and not as a main character in their own life with their own thoughts and feelings and needs and wants and goals and dreams. The thing about a supporting cast is that they're supposed to make life easier for you. That's why a lot of men have a strained relationship or a non-existent relationship with their children, because they don't understand the point. They don't understand the goal of like what that relationship is supposed to be, which is one of sacrifice. And a lot of men do not want to sacrifice for their children. They don't take care of their kids and they don't pay child support, because everyone in their life is supposed to make their life easier, not harder, because they're the main character. And women don't get to live like that. Women get to pick up that slack because we're the supporting cast. When you think about it like that, it explains all of men's behavior perfectly. From all the thoughtless gestures to all the gaslighting, to all the invalidation, to all the selfishness, it all makes perfect sense. This is why, like, when their wives get sick, men all of a sudden also always feel sick. They sense the power balance shifting, because to them, that's what it is. It's a power balance. It's like a dominance thing. It's like, oh, now I have to be your servant. No, I don't think so. I'm also sick. So actually, and I'm actually sicker than you, and it's actually been going on for longer, and I actually need to go lay down, and you need to take care of me. And that's why I say don't underestimate their commitment to it, to this bit, to this main character bit, because it really, that's how deep it goes. When their wife gets cancer, gets deathly ill, and they realize that all of a sudden, like, oh, they're gonna have to administer the medicine, they're gonna have to start doing housework, they're gonna have to cut down on their hours at work, they're going to have to really sacrifice parts of their life in order to care for somebody, and a lot of them can't handle it. And it's to the point where women who receive like a life-threatening diagnosis are also oftentimes given a pamphlet or other information on how to deal with your husband abandoning you. That's how big of a problem it is, because as soon as somebody steps into that main character spotlight by getting a life-threatening like disease, the man feels threatened, and the man feels like there's nothing in it for me here. He's not willing to be the supporting cast. Another aspect of this that really explains men's behavior is the fact that everybody needs to commit to the bit to make it work. That's why men tell me all the time, oh, I feel so bad for your husband. He's living such a miserable life. Really just their way of saying, like, I don't understand how to not be completely selfish, and I don't understand why anybody would ever choose another path. Also, him doing that raises the standards of women everywhere. So I really fucking hate him, because I don't want to do that. And I want to have my cake and eat it too. I want to be the main character. And I want that to be the expectation. I want all men to be the main character, so that it's not even a question of whether I get to be the main character or not on merit. So they're really just threatened. They're really just feeling the effects of like women, like not just like breathing down their neck, but like the little breeze that they're leaving behind as they're bypassing the men. That's why Harrison Butker feels the need to make like that whole little speech. If other men don't commit to this bit of like being the main character and centering themselves and actively decentering women at every opportunity, then he would have to actually like have merit. That's the real reason why they get mad at people like Russell Wilson or my husband or my dad, is because it compromises their unearned privilege of being the main character in the lives of all the people around them at any cost. This is why they worship Future, but they hate Russell Wilson. To them, Future is the main character of his own life, right? I guarantee you, if Future got married tomorrow and became an exemplary like husband and father and all this stuff, the very next day all the men would be like, oh, that man is so corny, like I never liked him to begin with, like he's cheesy, like he's a simp. And again, this is sadly because they lack the ability to really grasp the meaning of life. Like they'll never understand that Russell Wilson could give less of a shit about what they think, or that me or my husband could give less of a shit about what they think, because our lives are actually wonderful and there's like mutual sustainability there's mutual respect, there's mutual reciprocation. And most men just want to live and stay on the path of least resistance as the main character with a supporting cast. And I'm telling you, they will do that at any cost. That's why they go for women younger than them. That's why they divorce women as soon as they start challenging them on some of these concepts. That's why they want to roll back women's rights. It's this threat of you're going to have to actually earn your keep. And they don't want to do that because they feel like they can't. They're insecure. Secure men are not worried about stuff like that because they know they have something to offer. Men who have nothing to offer want to receive handouts in the form of being able to forcefully center themselves in a woman's life. Also explains why they've all of a sudden lost interest in schooling and in the workplace. As soon as women entered those spaces and started succeeding, even outperforming men, those things became less valuable to men because they are less exclusive now. And men's idea of success and masculinity and, like I said, this whole main character syndrome really operates on exclusivity and gatekeeping. And once they can't do that, it's not fun for them anymore. So they're dropping out of college and they're dropping out of the workforce. It's also the reason why they commit so many crimes and mass deletion events. It's another way to be the main character. That's another way to stay really committed to that bit and force yourself into a main character role. And that's why people will say, don't say his name, because that's what he wanted. You will resort basically to anything in order to feel relevant and important and like the world needs you in some way. That's why they feel so comfortable and so entitled to stalking, threatening, and harassing women. And why it really comes to them like so second nature that they don't even question it. Like it's called main character at any cost syndrome. This is why a lot of younger men are skewing more conservative politically, because we didn't really focus on this issue of main character syndrome when we dove headfirst into boss girl feminism, which was in itself like an interesting phenomenon because women are now really in this limbo of having been made both an inextricable tool to both the patriarchy and to capitalism. If women left the workforce now, that would be a really big problem, and most people couldn't afford that. And capitalism has really been structured now around a double income household. But also, they are an inextricable part of the patriarchy where they need to be decentered so that men can be centered. Those two things are really duking it out right now. Why we're having our rights getting rolled back, but not the rights that would affect the bottom line of capitalism negatively. Everything that's being rolled back will positively impact the bottom line. Abortion being rolled back means there's more mouths to feed, so people need to work more. There's more stuff to buy for the baby. There's daycare costs eventually. That's another contributing member of society. Like all that is good for capitalism. Also good for the patriarchy because it decenters women even further and it gives men this opportunity to become a main character in a woman's life on negative merit. And that's why there's a lot of situations where men will say they want a child and they want a family and like all this stuff. And then when they realize it's actually a lot of work and they start to feel decentered by the child, which literally like a lot of them will say that verbatim. They'll say, oh, I'm jealous of the attention that my wife is giving the baby. If you feel threatened and decentered by a baby, I don't know what to tell you. Like maybe she needs a rest. Maybe she's having a hard time because all of her attention is going to the baby and maybe she just needs some alone time. Like most men are not capable of thinking like that because of what they've been taught and because of what they believe about themselves and their purpose in life, which is to be the main character. So they can't stand it when their wife is the main character. They can't stand it when their baby is the main character. They can't stand it when their wife makes more money than them because in our society that makes her the main character. We're just at this very interesting intersection where patriarchy and capitalism have like different uses for women, and both of those uses are very important. All of it depends on men being centered. The reason why it seems like the whole world is fighting women on simply centering themselves. Why people are so up in arms about the 4B movement. That's why Bumble is really like trying to grapple with this whole thing of like, let's threaten women back into the dating pool because the men are bored and angry. And there's a lot of money to be made here. It's like you're both a tool for the patriarchy and for capitalism. And this whole recent Bumble scenario is really like this perfect like overlapping of the two things. And that's why people love to threaten women with, oh, like, you're going to end up alone and sad and like cats and whatever. And are like, don't threaten me with a good time. That means I get to be the main character in my own life. That means I chose that. That means that I didn't have to abandon my career for my children, move across the country for my husband. That means I didn't have to abandon all my friends and relationships that I made. It means that I get to have cats because a lot of men don't like cats. Guess why? Because cats do whatever the fuck they want. And to men, that's their biggest nightmare, is being stuck with something or someone that you can't control. Because you're supposed to, as the main character, be able to push a button and control things. All that to say, I'm afraid it's probably only going to get worse. The things that men are committed to cannot function without the subjugation and the forced decentering of women. And of course, the other hierarchy that plays into this is race. A lot of our systems couldn't function if we didn't have forceful centering of white people, for example, and the forceful decentering of people of color. It all works the same way. But when it comes to women, the systems are really going to fight hard against women centering themselves. That's why you see a lot of this like attempt to sort of reduce women down to things to look at or things that have to be attractive in order for their opinion to be taken seriously. If you're saying something I don't like, it's because you're ugly and undesirable. And if you're not ugly and undesirable, it's because you ran through. And if it's not because you ran through, it's because your husband's miserable. And if it's not because your husband's miserable, you're single and you're miserable. You're always like reduced down to these aspects. And it's very dehumanizing, but it's meant to be. It's meant to be dehumanizing so that another human can succeed without any merit. So that you have to work twice as hard. And women know this is true. People of color know this is true. Especially women of color have to work a million times as hard as everybody else. It's because the systems that we operate in and the systems that benefit the people in power is why they're in place by the forceful centering of men and whiteness and a class hierarchy and money and all of that, and decentering other human beings so that other people can succeed and thrive for free, undeservedly, on no merit of their own. And deep down, they all know this. That's why they're threatened by the dismantling of these systems. That's why they're threatened with the consequences of their own actions. They've never had to deal with those things. That's why we only started talking about cancel culture when it was the white men that were being held responsible for their own actions. It became cancel culture. Nobody else before was being canceled. To take a white man down from the stage, that's cancellation. That's been happening to people of color for ages. That's been happening to women for ages. Say one thing wrong and that's it. They're deplatformed, they are blacklisted, etc. That's what I mean by like they can't comprehend being not the main character, and also like the whole system is held together by every man really thinking that. That's why they go against other men who try to be progressive, and they start reducing them down to their features as well in order to dehumanize them. And that's why they support and lift up toxic, terrible men, because it gives them the platform to stand on of I'm the main character and at any cost. That's why they like people like Andrew Tate and not like Russell Wilson. But yeah, it's basically like a king of the hill situation to men. They can't fathom that everybody can function together on a level playing field. Like that's not an option for them in their minds. Because really the other way is way more fun. And everybody else knows this. It's crazy making, because when you try to explain this to people who have been satiated with privilege and main character syndrome their whole life, they just don't get it. It really feels like a futile battle because they fight so hard against being decentered and they hate it so much. But they do it to women actively all the time. Have you ever tried to ask a man to take notes in a meeting? Have you ever tried just repeating something a man said and taking credit for it? It probably wouldn't go very well for you. But men do shit like that all the time. They literally will put their dirty dishes in the office sink and expect a woman to clean them up. That's why men tend to be so okay with living in horrid, squalor-like conditions. To them, like, doing something even for themselves is like letting go of that main character syndrome a little bit. That's why they'll sit there and talk about, oh, women's places are so nice. Like, man, I wish. Like, you don't have to wish. You can just do it. They're actually hoping that women will see videos like that and be like, let me create that for you. Yeah, come over to my house and like mooch off of my awesome atmosphere that I worked hard to create, because you can't be fucking bothered to do anything, even for yourself. The main character really means that it has to be other people to do everything for you. And that's why they don't care if women like them or not. That's why they don't care if like they're coercing and forcing things out of women, because the main goal is to just not do anything yourself. And so that's why like a lot of people just say stay away from men in general, because sometimes we're so desensitized to this main character syndrome that we don't realize it until it's way too late, that they're really going to stick to that formula at any cost. I hope this helps. Good luck and Godspeed. I love you.
Had my fair share of experiences with ghosts and spirits, or at least what I believe are ghosts and spirits. If you don't believe in that kind of thing, that's totally fine. But one of the most intense experiences I've ever had with ghosts or spirits, or whatever you want to call them, was when I visited the Portland Underground. If you don't know anything about Portland, Oregon, it has an incredibly dark past. It used to be seen as one of the most dangerous ports in the world. This is because of the human trafficking trade that consisted of kidnapping and drugging thousands of men and women, and then proceeding to drag them through the network of tunnels that ran underneath Portland, and then sell those people into slavery. Victims were held in these tiny makeshift cells underneath the city. A lot of these victims were children. When I was 15, I decided to go with my family for a historical tour of the tunnels. It was incredibly jarring, to say the least. I thought I knew what I was getting into when I signed up for the tour, but I had no idea that it was going to be that somber and heavy of an experience. But then we came to the cells, and the tour guide asked if I would like to try standing in one of the cells, because I was the only kid on the tour and the only person who could comfortably fit inside of it. These were cells grown adult men were being held captive in. And he asked me to try and put my fingers through the bars, and my fingers wouldn't fit. And peering through the bars of the cell, I saw across the room a pile of shoes. And I became so overwhelmed with grief. And it was like not my own grief. Like, obviously, when you stand in a place like that and you know that thousands of innocent people have suffered and died there, it's a really heavy experience. But I was standing in that cell. I just felt this overwhelming chill completely wash over me. And it wasn't sinister. It wasn't like bad. It was just overwhelmingly sad. It wasn't like I felt anything touch me or saw anything move or heard anybody say something to me. It overwhelmingly felt like there were people there trying to tell me something. I feel like I've only had maybe 2 ghostly experiences where things physically happened in front of my eyes that I could see. A lot of the times, it's just felt overwhelmingly like there is somebody there. It's totally okay if you don't believe in this kind of thing. I personally believe that there are places where the veil is very thin, and the Portland Underground is one of those places. Being said, if you don't know anything about the history of Portland, Oregon, and you want to go down a bit of a historical rabbit hole, it's extremely gnarly. I think it's really important knowledge to have, especially if you grew up in the Pacific Northwest. Portland may be a relatively different place now, but it actually hasn't changed as much as we think. This is a piece of its history that should not be erased.
Even friends disagree with my opinion on.
I'm here. I'm intruding on the discourse about Finnick with my thoughts about Finnick. Was he a career or not? So the thing about whether or not Finnick is a career is that there is not necessarily a right or a wrong answer to this, because nothing is ever confirmed or denied. Also, the only person who calls them careers is Katniss. Like, the Capitol does not call them careers. Nobody outside of District 12 calls them careers. So technically, Finnick is only truly a career to the people in District 12. But what kind of career, if you want to call him that, was he? Did he get reaped and nobody volunteered for him? Or did he volunteer as a 14-year-old? I personally believe that Finnick did not volunteer, and here is why I think that. I feel like it would have been mentioned, first of all, because Katniss was a volunteer, and she was 16 when she volunteered, and Finnick was 14 when he would have supposedly volunteered, and I feel like that would have come up in conversation between the two of them, because people were constantly bringing up that Katniss volunteered for her sister. Second of all, I feel like this would have been a moment that Finnick started to wake up and become disillusioned to what was actually going on. Because I feel like if a 14-year-old had gotten drawn for the reaping in a career district, the plan of action would probably be to have like an 18-year-old volunteer in their place. Less to protect the young child and more to increase the likelihood of them winning. Well, imagine if Finnick had his name called and he goes up there thinking that he's not going to go into the games because surely somebody's going to volunteer for him, and then nobody volunteers for him. Can you imagine the devastation? Can you imagine the anger that would be like bubbling up from within him in that moment? But also, to Sadie's point, no matter which way you spin it, whether he volunteered or not, it adds a lot of context to Finnick's overall narrative. Because on one hand, if he didn't volunteer, you get a lot of context as to why he might be thinking the way he's thinking. But on the other hand, if he was a career in the traditional sense like Cato was, we see the types of people that Cato and Clove may have become should they have won the Hunger Games. It humanizes these people that we have been told to vilify. It makes you as an audience member uncomfortable because you realize that you have been unjustly judging all of these characters. It also makes you second guess every other thing that Katniss has ever told you about anybody, because we can't tell what's real and not real anymore about these people. It all just comes full fucking circle to what is real and what is not real. What is real and not real about Finnick? We honestly have no clue. I love discussing Finnick because he's really not your typical career tribute. Because we only meet Finnick after he's already been a victor for several years, it's really easy to picture him as somebody who was already seen as the Capitol darling when he went into the Hunger Games, even though that wasn't the case. Also really easy to think that because he was in a career district, it was assumed that he had a good chance of winning. It's important to remember a couple of things. One, the only people we ever hear use the word career to describe Districts 1, 2, and 4 is Katniss, Haymitch, and Peeta. So we know none of the specifics that led up to Finnick going into the arena. We don't know for sure if he volunteered. We don't know if his name was drawn. We don't know if he was training or if he just learned everything he needed from his job in his district. We also know that District 4 had a very different relationship with the Capitol than Districts 1 and 2. The reason they're in the Capitol's good graces is not necessarily because they are licking the boots of all of the peacekeepers, more so that they are in a coastal area. They are the only group of people that knows how to navigate that area, and especially if they were to have any kind of international import, District 4 has all the power in the world in that they actually have the ability to escape and go somewhere. And if I let my headcanons run away with me and I consider the fact that there could be international imports that District 4 would receive, then they would also have the power of information in knowing that there is another world out there. That is not canon. That's just me thinking things from my brain. Well, because District 4's relationship with the Capitol looked a lot different from Districts 1 and 2, and technically it was illegal to train to be a career tribute in the Hunger Games, if District 4 had to work harder to get in the Capitol's good graces and stay there, their selection process for tributes might be a lot different from the other career districts. That is all to say, whether or not Finnick is a career really depends on your personal definition of a career tribute. Regardless of whether or not he volunteered, I personally consider Finnick a career tribute, because career is a District 12 specific word. So if someone from District 12 saw somebody as a career, I see them as a career, even if I know that my personal definition of career doesn't necessarily fit who they are as a person. So, was Finnick a career? Yes, if you think so. But also no, if you think he's not. Beauty of this series is that there are no wrong answers a lot of the time. It really just depends on what text you use to back up how you think. My favorite thing about the Hunger Games is that there's no right or wrong way to interpret it. It just depends on what text you use to back up what you're talking about. Because the question that is asked over and over and over and over again throughout the whole series is real or not real. Not only do the characters ask that, but we as readers are asking that because we cannot depend on the narrator of the book to tell the entire story. They have a very limited point of view. So when it comes to questions like, was Finnick a career? There's no right or wrong answer to that. It just depends on where you look for the answer in the text. There was so much discourse yesterday about whether or not Finnick was a career, whether or not he volunteered to go into the Reaping, and the honest to God answer to all of those questions is yes if you think so, and no if you think not, because we don't know for sure. There are pretty few fan theories about the Hunger Games that I really viscerally hate, and the only ones that I truly despise are the ones that pull no evidence from the text to back themselves up. Which is why I absolutely despise the theory that Lucy Gray is President Coin, because the open-ended nature of it is what makes it so fun to discuss. Did Lucy Gray survive? Yes, if you think so, but no if you think not.
Can we just accept that there's not really a good way to make a reboot of a show that was popular when we were children? Because I knew Beyond Wizards of Waverly Place was gonna be really bad. But I was like, maybe they'll age it up a little bit because the people who watched it as kids are grown up now. So maybe Alex will say fuck. Or maybe even a cheeky damn or something. But then that would just be the iCarly reboot. And that was also really bad. There's just not a good way to do this. There's not a good way to do this. And then as an adult, I'm watching the reboot and I'm just feeling like these actors, the most successful point of their life was being on this show as a teenager. And now they're back doing exactly what they were doing as a teenager. And then I just start feeling kind of bad. Like, who is this for? Who could this possibly be for? The only people I've ever heard ask for a Wizards of Waverly Place reboot are the people who have the Wizards of Waverly Place podcast. Like, I feel kind of bad watching the videos from, like, the premiere and seeing how excited people were about it. And then watching it and just, it's really bad. You know how the actress from Ned's Declassified has been going on a rant on TikTok about how Ned's Declassified didn't get picked up for a reboot, but Spider-Man did. A lot of people have been saying this is giving Peaked in High School, but it's not. Because Ned's Declassified is a show about middle schoolers. They were in middle school when that show came out, you guys. Not even high school. They are clinging to middle school as the peak of their glory days. How sad. I'm like, that's really sad. That's really sad. Man, I kind of want to give you the reboot just so that you'll stop talking about it, because it's really depressing. And like, do you want to know what my biggest memory from Ned's Declassified is? The only thing about Ned's Declassified I would want a spin-off of? The fucking janitor. The janitor, who was the voice of Cosmo in The Fairly Odd Parents. I want a spin-off about him and that fucking ferret, because that was the only comprehensive storyline that I actually paid attention to all the way to the end of the show. If you're on Hunger Games TikTok, you probably saw a lot of discourse happening this week about whether or not Finnick is a career. And this discussion has gotten me thinking about how we are taught to analyze literature, because I've been seeing a growing number of people losing their ability to see nuance in these discussions and debates, and adopting a very right versus wrong, black versus white mentality when entering into these literary discussions and debates. And in my video about whether or not Finnick is a career, I said, yes, he is, if you think he is, but no, he's not, if you think he's not. Because there is evidence in the text to support both sides of the argument, and it really depends on what you use to defend your stance. And I got a comment on that video that was like, yes if you think so, and no if you think not is a very dangerous thing to say. It was in a really jokey tone, but it still made me think, because if we were having this discussion in a high school classroom, there likely would be a right and a wrong answer to this debate that we're all having. And there are many people in the education world and parents of people in the education world who think that having multiple interpretations of the same text is in fact a dangerous thing. I grew up in a religion where it was considered dangerous to question the teachings and the doctrine of what you were reading. It was considered dangerous not only to see nuance, but to seek out nuance. And this is why I love discussing what I read on here, because I will have thousands of different interpretations of the same passage of text that I'm talking about. When I talk about my fan theories on here that may or may not be extremely controversial, like my opinion that the Hunger Games reapings are rigged, my favorite comments to interact with on those videos are the ones that disagree with me, because it furthers the conversation and we dive more into the text together, and it makes me question things that I've never questioned before, and it makes me second guess myself on things I've never second guessed myself on before. Anyways, let's keep these good vibes going. I know the narrative about President Snow's granddaughter got away from me a while ago now, okay? But do you ever think about the fact that President Snow has a granddaughter? He copulated with somebody. Pretty much all of what we see from her is in the movies, and I know there are some things that happen in the movies that are not necessarily canon. What they do with her is just so perfect. Imagine being an evil dictator, and your entire job basically hinges on whether or not the equivalent of Billie Eilish can get everyone to hate you. Then imagine going downstairs and seeing your granddaughter dressed as Billie Eilish. The girl was his worst nightmare. I love what the movies did with her. My favorite deleted scene in the entire film franchise is when they're holding PETA at the Capitol at President Snow's mansion, and President Snow is like chilling in his office, and then his granddaughter pops up on FaceTime. And it's like, can I meet him? And then he calls her a crazed fangirl. She was his worst nightmare. That one scene is all of the fodder I needed to make literally every other video I've ever made about her, because that was so good. Also, for all we know, she made it to the end. Like, she survived, and they were considering putting her in the Hunger Games. Oh my god. Suzanne, please give us a spin-off about that girl. This alone has convinced me that the Ned's Declassified cast doesn't actually want a reboot. They are just rage baiting because this is the only form of income they have anymore. Because this has been one of the longest public humiliation rituals
I have ever seen someone put themselves through. I have lost track of the number of cancelable offenses the Ned's Declassified cast has done in the last 3 years. Like, the Moe's actress said a bunch of really racist stuff online. The Ned actor made fun of CSA victims from the Quiet on Set documentary, reminiscing about their sexual escapades that they had on set while filming the show. And it's already a little bit like, ugh, when you see somebody desperately clinging on to their high school days. I don't know what feeling to assign to watching a grown adult clinging to their glory days of fictional middle school. They are clinging to a recreation of the absolute worst 3 years of my life. They didn't even go to real middle school. They want to reboot a show giving people survival advice for a world they were never even a part of, that they are now even further disconnected from because they're grown adults and they can't seem to accept that. Oh my god, Tom Blythe is so hot as young President Snow. Oh my god, Tom Blythe. Tom Blythe, Tom Blythe. Tom Blythe, I love you, and you're a great young President Snow. But in my heart, it belongs to young Donald Sutherland. Why did you die? Why did you die? One of the main reasons President Snow's granddaughter has become one of my favorite characters to speculate about, even though we know next to nothing about her, is because we don't actually know nothing about her. We know so much about her because Suzanne Collins has covered her bases so well. Because at the bare fucking minimum, we know that President Snow is her grandfather, which comes with a whole series of implications. But Tigress is her great aunt. That alone tells us a lot about what she probably experienced as a youth. It is also implied through dialogue that she survives to the end of the series because they discuss the possibility of putting her into the Hunger Games. And just from the fact that she's President Snow's granddaughter, she's Tigress's great niece, and she survives, brings up so many possibilities and questions. And then remembering that throughout this entire ordeal, she was a child the whole time. She was still young enough to be put into the reaping for the Hunger Games when the Hunger Games finally ended. And even though the skits that I make about her are super silly and not based on anything canonical whatsoever, I still wonder constantly about her perspective of everything that happened, especially being the granddaughter of the leader of the nation. And remembering that at the end of the day, she was a teenage girl in the middle of all of this. And while it's one thing to rebel against your government, it's another thing when you're a teenage girl to rebel against whatever your family members are telling you to do, because you don't take them fucking seriously. Even though President Snow was an evil mad dictator, if that whole thing had been totally normalized to his whole family for his whole life, his granddaughter would still just see him as Peepaw. And I think it's interesting to speculate about what that family dynamic may have looked like when she was in the throes of teenage rebellion. I have both an agree and a disagree in response to this comment, because this is also one of my favorite parts of the Hunger Games. But I will argue that at least in the book, it's pretty obvious from the get-go that Coin is an evil, conniving dictator. Something that has become one of my favorite parts of the Hunger Games is when I see people watch the movies for the first time when they haven't read the books, and they slowly start to find out throughout the course of Mockingjay that Coin is evil. Because it's still very obvious, but it is way more subtle in the movies that she's actually super evil. But pretty immediately within the first chapter, we find out that the main reason why so many people have been brought into District 13 is because their population was decimated by a pox virus. And Katniss realizes that she is just seen as breeding stock for District 13. In the Mockingjay movie, they also replace Katniss's prep team with Effie, which I never hear anybody complain about that because everybody loves Effie. But in removing the prep team from the movies, they also removed the entire arc of retrieving the prep team from their cells. And Katniss becoming aware of the conditions they were being kept under when she sees the drain in the middle of the floor and realizes what it's for. They also removed the entire arc of Joanna getting rescued. And the fact that she was so traumatized from the torture she endured in the Capitol involving water and electrocution that she couldn't even take a shower, she couldn't even go out in the rain, and she had to train to be a soldier in the pouring, dumping rain. And this all happens before Katniss ever decides that she's gonna go rogue. They just removed literally all of that from the movie, so it's a lot more shocking when we see that Coin is actually terrible. I'm never, ever, 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 ever going to forgive them for removing as much of Joanna as they did from the Mockingjay movies. Like, I swear to God, they didn't read the book. They do not understand the importance of Joanna stepping in as an older sister figure to Katniss, and Katniss is starting to wonder what it might have been like to have an older sister and to be a younger sister, and then right as she starts to appreciate that, her younger sister dies. Do they not understand the significance, the implication? One topic I'm never gonna get tired of talking about is what they left out of the Hunger Games movies, but specifically the Mockingjay movies. I'm increasingly perplexed by their creative decisions. I understand wanting to keep a little bit more mystery around the morals of some of the characters, but in doing so, they made part 1 last 8 billion years. I know this is a stale talking point, but I'm still going to talk about it because it pisses me off. They removed like half of what made the book interesting from the first movie. Like, imagine the edits we would get of Katniss and Joanna if they had been allowed to explore their sibling relationship. What about the scene where Katniss allows Joanna to touch all of her most precious possessions that are priceless to her because she realizes that Joanna doesn't have any? It pisses me off. It legitimately pisses me off. And then we have Effie, and her inclusion in the movies is not an issue at all. But they conveniently excluded the fact that she was also tortured and held captive in the Capitol. We don't actually see her for all of Mockingjay until the very end, and she's fucking traumatized. We do not see that. We don't see that at all, and it pisses me off. And we always come back to Gale Hawthorne. I've talked about Gale so much on here that I think he's starting to become one of my favorite characters, and not in that I like him because he's terrible, but he's one of my favorite characters to analyze in the same way that President Snow is one of my favorite characters to analyze. But the Hollywoodification of Gale Hawthorne is so tragic. They reduced him to 50% eyebrows and 50% guy who killed Prim, and that's what like 90% of the fandom remembers him for. God, he's so much more than that. He's so much more than that. People don't hate him for the correct reason, and having him played by Walmart Thor did not help, because everyone collectively forgot that he was a child. And I'm not anti-casting adults for these roles, but he just looked way too fucking old. We don't see Gale going from a scared little kid who is angry at the oppressive regime that he's suffering under, getting groomed by a dictator into committing war crimes. When we meet him in the movies, he's like already a grown man who's like ready to be on the front line. We only see a tiny fraction of the things that humanize Gale in the movies versus the books. But it's honestly emotionally a lot easier to view Gale without a lens of nuance and see him as this angry, horrible person who killed Katniss's sister on purpose. Because the reality is so much more devastating. He became the person he suffered under, and he didn't design the bomb just to kill Prim. He designed it to kill numerous innocent people, even if Prim happened to be in that group of people. He was okay with gambling his best friend's sister's life, the life that he had sworn to do everything to protect. For Katniss, it was never about liberating her country. It was all about Prim. Everything up to the detonation of the bomb was about protecting Prim, and Gale ruined all of that because he gambled with her life. Like, he is deplorable by the end of the books. Deplorable. And in the movies, he sucks, but Liam Hemsworth just isn't an interesting enough person to hate with that much nuance. This is the thing about Prim's death that really grinds my gears when people forget. The Prim Reaper jokes never get old. They never get old. But Gale is not the only Prim Reaper. This was not a one-person job. And the movies removed a lot of the context that would explain why Prim was there in the first place. Like, one of the first clues we get that Coin is evil is not just the fact that she uses child labor, like Prim was 13 training to become a doctor. She also uses child soldiers. She already was okay with the idea of putting children on the front lines of battle. She also hated Katniss and saw her as a threat and wanted her gone, and would do anything to do that. which is why in the books at least, Coin is constantly subjecting her to conditions that are triggering for her and re-traumatize her. She allows her to go into the room with Peeta even though she knows that Peeta is dangerous. She puts Katniss and all of the other people who were not big fans of Coin into one group and then puts Peeta in that group when he is still incredibly unpredictable. And then he kills one of them. She did everything in her power to break Katniss's spirit, but she couldn't because the one thing keeping it alive was still there. Prim. Coin was the person that made sure Prim would be there on the front lines, in the line of fire. And you cannot tell me she didn't do that on purpose to try and stop Katniss from preventing her rise to power. Like, I feel like the person Coin wanted dead more than anyone else in the world, more than Snow, was Prim. Prim posed the biggest threat to her because she was the driving motivation for the person who posed the greatest threat to her. Especially because if Snow wasn't bluffing when he was talking to Katniss in the greenhouse at the end of everything, the Capitol was already prepared to surrender. That last detonation didn't need to happen if President Snow was somehow telling the truth. Like, Prim being where she was 100% not an accident. And that doesn't mean Gale doesn't have her blood on his hands, but he also wasn't the person who put her there. It was a team effort.